Welcome to the Power of Your Voice podcast with your host, Johnny Gorky. You have the power to overcome challenges and fears. Let my voice and the voice of many others show you how to transform these challenges into opportunities. To learn more about future podcasts and read episode show notes, check out my website at www.thepowerofyourvoice.com.
Welcome back to the Power of Your Voice podcast. Today's guest is Eric Partaker. He's a certified high-performance coach, award-winning entrepreneur, CEO, speaker, and author. As a peak performance expert, Eric Partaker helps CEOs and entrepreneurs scale up themselves and their companies while also improving their well-being. Within his approach, he draws from his time advising Fortune 500 CEOs at McKinsey, his experience helping building up Skype's multi-billion-dollar success story, and his own entrepreneurial journeys, together with his behavioral science from Stanford University, as well as techniques from the world's elite sport and military areas where peak performance is key. Eric has been named the UK CEO of the Year at the 2009 Business Excellence Awards, one of the top 30 entrepreneurs in the UK, 35 and under by Startups magazine, and among Britain's Most Disruptive Entrepreneurs by the Telegraph. His work has been featured on over 7 major TV stations, in the Wall Street Journal and the Economist. He has also appeared as a guest judge on The Apprentice with Lord Alan Sugar in the UK. Eric, you are a certified high-performance coach. I think there's 30 in the entire world.
There's a few hundred in the world.
Okay, a few hundred, but yeah, it's very elite. You're an award-winning entrepreneur, you're a CEO, you're a speaker, and you're an author. Now, going into your childhood, Eric, how was your upbringing? What challenges did you face in your adolescence and experiences that shifted you into the leader that you are? And again, welcome to the Power of Your Voice podcast, Eric.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone who's donating your valuable time to listen, because we all know how precious time is. I grew up with a chip on my shoulder because it seemed like no matter how hard I tried, I would always get second best or less than best. And I'll give you some examples. So I remember Little League Baseball. As I mentioned, I moved from Norway when I was 5. I grew up in Chicago from that age. And, I made the baseball team, and it was one of the, the better teams in the league. And I was so proud for having made the team. And I was a great fielder. I played third base. And I could never hit the ball. I would just strike out all the time. I'd get the bat on the ball sometimes, in practice, but game time, just choke at the plate every single time. And then basketball. I remember sophomore year at high school, I decided, okay, I want to play basketball and make the varsity team the following year. The only problem was I had never played a game in my life. And so academics had always come a little bit easier to me than athletics. So remember, I bought this book called Hoops. This is back in 1991, and I thought I would study my way into becoming a good basketball player. So I took this book Hoops. Every morning I woke up at 5:30. I'd go to I'd dribble to the park in between the legs, working the left hand as much as possible. Get to the park, shoot around for an hour, study all the different moves, practice them. And then I ended up making the team, the varsity team, my junior year. And I never started a game. And when I did get into the games, it's I just grew up, with this feeling of kind of always trying, my best and hardest, but always kind of having mediocre results. And then academically, same sort of thing. I wanted to kind of get that top spot. I finished in the top 10, number 10. But I was 5 and I just never managed to do it. So yeah, growing up, I always felt I had the blue collar work ethic from my parents, and I worked really, really hard. But I always felt no matter how hard I tried, always second best, or would always do something that would embarrass myself, in front of those who were at the top of their game.
Now, how did you overcome that though?
Right. So, yeah. So that just kept going and going. And then I had my kind of first like peak performance breakthrough, if you call it that, when I was sitting in a management and organizational behavior class. And I went to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Big Ten school. And there was a visiting professor from Stanford teaching the class. And that's why I actually took the class, because I thought, okay, I'll never get in front of a Stanford professor. So, this is my opportunity. And then I remember he said, if anyone in the class gets a job at the company that I'm about to profile next, I'll fall out of my chair. And I always like challenges. I love challenges. And I was like, ooh, that perked me up. I was like, that's a challenge. And the company he profiled ended up being McKinsey and Company, which is, the very top of management consultancies in the world. And, he said to the class, only half joking, that they only hire NASA rocket scientists and, Ivy League graduates. And I said to him, I said, well, I'm going to get a job there. And he's like, okay, good luck. And so I ended up researching the company. I found out very quickly that they look at a lot more than just academics. I didn't have anything on my resume besides like academic. So I needed something quickly. I joined the finance club, not because I was that passionate about finance, but just because I needed something. And then I remember the first day in the finance club, the club president says, okay, well, we need to organize our company, field trip to a prospective employer, right, for graduates. Who wants to do it? Boom, I shot my hand up. I'm like, I'll do it, because I knew the company. So boom, I'm on the phone the next day with McKinsey in Chicago saying, our club would like to organize a field trip to your offices and organize a field trip. That was my in. I was able to make a face-to-face, firsthand impression with the recruiter. Followed up a couple of weeks later, said I really like a shot at interviewing. What is the schedule like? She told me what the whole interview schedule would be like, and she invited me to interview. And then I found out about the interview process, which was 9 grueling. They call them case interviews. They give you like abstract mathematical and business problems.
Wow.
So then I called my ma and I asked her. I said, do you know anybody at the University of Chicago, business school? Because I thought I need to find somebody there who's also trying to get into, McKinsey, to see if I can get any tips or tricks or anything. And I ended up being introduced to the president of the Management Consulting Club at the University of Chicago. Similar deal, right? Trying to help people get jobs, as the finance club was doing, help people get jobs in finance, help people get jobs in management consulting. So I did like 30 practice interviews with members of this club, all in preparation for the McKinsey interview process. And I ended up landing the job. There was 22 roles, 2,000 applicants. I was one of 2 people that they chose that didn't come from an Ivy League school. I was like the state school misfit.
But you did your research. You did your research.
I did my research. I got in, and that for me, your question was, how did you overcome it? That moment was like the great equalizer for me. I thought, okay, all these other more privileged kids, all these, these guys and girls who went to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, where companies like McKinsey kind of roll out the red carpet for them. I had to fight my way tooth and nail to get in. But yeah, I did my research and that leveled the playing field. And once I was there, then I felt a lot more confident. And that was like the springboard for it all.
That's beautiful because, I think for a lot of people, the challenge is, you grow up, maybe you come from a poor family and you're going to go to college, but you're not going to go to MIT or Harvard or Yale or Princeton or something. And maybe you want to work at some high-tech company like Google or something. You're like, well, I'm not going to go to MIT, so I'm not even going to try to interview for a job like that because there's no way they would ever hire me. But if you're able to do your research and you're very determined to do something, you can overachieve anything if you really, really want it really bad. And you obviously did. And that's incredible.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, if any, exactly, it's such a good point too. If anybody listening who's thinking that there's things in life that you want to achieve that you've just assumed without even trying are reserved for the special ones, that's garbage. That's it comes down to I'm sure I said there was 22, right? 22 people, people who got job offers. I was one of two from state schools. I'm sure all 20 of the Ivy League kids, all of them were smarter than me. Sure they were. But I had the grit and determination to get in there too. And once you get in, what you may not have in book smarts, you will build, through street smarts by just being in the job and doing it and, racking up the repetitions and the experience. Yeah. And that's, it's the same with basketball. I didn't make a single shot, but, I didn't grow up, with the game or have anybody to teach me, but it's just grit and determination to figure out the basics, right? To get on the team.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing to think about too is sometimes, if you grow up in a really nice family and you go Ivy League school and that's what you're used to. Sometimes people might take that stuff for granted, but when you get somebody like you, who's just very passionate, they put in their grit, they put blood, sweat, and tears in something, they're going to appreciate that kind of stuff a lot more than somebody who's just kind of used to that kind of stuff just being handed to them because of who they are or who their parents are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've experienced it time and again since that no matter what you want to do, if you're a fighter, you can get in the door and you can do it. And, I'll give you a few more examples. So after McKinsey, I did a little bit of nonprofit work in Norway, but then I wanted to go into tech. But once again, similar to basketball, the only problem was I had never done anything in tech before. And I spotted this company, Skype, and I had been using it in its very early days. This is back in 2003, before most people were using it. And I thought, this company is going to be big, and I want to be part of this. And I sent in an application, and they rejected me. And they said, no, we don't need someone with a business background. We need tech people. I said, yeah, but you're going to need somebody to close business deals at some point because you're growing quickly. No, we're fine. I said, okay. 3 months later, I send in the application again. Recruiter calls me. She goes, you're persistent. And she said, the other thing is, why on earth was your cover letter dated December 25th? And it just dawned on me at that moment, I hadn't even realized it, that I was working on my cover letter and sending in the application on Christmas Day. Like that's how determined I was to get in. I was forgetting the fact that it was Christmas, And she said, yeah, okay, well, we'll have you in for an interview. And I got the job. And just 3 months later, that's all that happened. And then helped build that up. That was an absolute rocket ship of a journey. We grew from 30 to 500 people. eBay bought the company for $4 billion. It was one of the biggest European exits at the time. This is back in 2005 when that happened. So, another example of having no experience, not having the acumen, not, coming from the right pedigree or whatever, and you just fight your way in. And then after that, I'll give you one more example. I was thinking, well, what should I do next? And I was sitting on my sofa and I was thinking, well, when did work not feel like work? When did when did it just feel like fun? And I remembered back to when I used to be big as a house, like 235 pounds. And so I used to work the door. And I was a bouncer basically at one of the campus bars in college. And I thought, yeah, that was a fun job. Occasionally I had to throw somebody out, but usually it was quite civil. And so I thought, okay, I should look at something in the restaurant bar industry. And then I thought also back to university, I thought, man, when we went to that place, La Bamba, it was this burrito place. I thought that was a lot of fun. We'd go to La Bamba. Of course, it was after a night out and drinks. So I don't know how good the burritos actually were, but they tasted great at the time. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe that's what I should do. I should go into restaurants. I'm missing Mexican food. And I looked around at the time in London and there was no Mexican restaurants.
Really?
And so I started a chain of Mexican restaurants in London. And hadn't started, I'm not Mexican. I had never, started a chain of restaurants before, but again, through grit and determination, networked my way to the right people, got the right people in the right positions, and, created an award-winning chain, and then ultimately experienced loss with all of that because just last month, the whole thing, with coronavirus, had to go into bankruptcy and then, pick myself up from that. And, actually alongside of that, I had started a peak performance coaching business. And so that was already in play actually. So it was, it didn't hurt me, from an income point of view when the restaurant chain kind of perished to the pandemic. But yeah, my point though, with all of that was that at each step of the journey, whether it was basketball, McKinsey, Skype, building the restaurant chain, I didn't have any prior experience, but I did have the grit and determination to figure it out and to network to the right people who did.
Yeah, wow, you've definitely overcome a lot. Now, I've been watching your YouTube channel, and I just see you talk about overcoming perfectionism, because that's something that a lot of us, we deal with. I definitely struggle with that, to be honest. Now, can you dive into your 80-20 principle and what is exactly good enough? Because a lot of times, I'll be doing something and like, it has to be perfect. It has to be perfect. But there's a thing where as long as it's good enough, it's good enough.
You got it. So yeah, 80-20 this is my favorite peak performance principle of like all time, of all principles that you could embrace and really learn. It's this one. So 80-20 is simply, and a lot of people have heard it, but those listening, you may not have fully embraced its power, fully understand exactly what it means. All it means is that 20% of the causes create 80% of the effects, or 20% of your effort in life will often create 80% of the results, or 20% of, say, the choices you've made in your business or in your life, if you think back, were like at pivotal moments that created 80% of the results. Or back to the restaurant chain example, I looked at the myriad of things that we could be focusing on to generate, guest satisfaction, and I zeroed in on what are the 20% of things that we can do to generate 80% of the guest satisfaction. We focused on flavor rather than all the other things that we could focus on. So it's just this law that things are not set up equal, in the universe, in the world. There's often a small minority of things in any situation, within a project, within a particular event, that will generate 80% of the outcome. Now, you can't get too caught up on the 80-20. It's think of it as the spirit of the law rather than the letter. It's just that a minority of effort often generates a majority of the results. And your goal then is to figure out, well, where are the leverage points? What are the most important things that will generate, the greatest amount, of results. So with 80-20, how that relates to perfectionism is that a perfectionist, which I used to be, will look at a project or something that needs to be complete and want to get it to perfect. So let's think about it mathematically. Let's say that you are working on a presentation or a new website design or whatever it is. Pick your flavor, right? Whatever it might be. We'll call it a project. And let's say to get that to perfection, where you're like, damn, that is amazing. That is good. That is like untouchable. Let's say it would take 5 hours of work. So 80-20 principle says, okay, could you have just worked on it for 1 hour? And although it wouldn't have been 100% perfect, it would have been 80% good enough. And then now the perfectionists, when they hear that, they go, oh gosh, yeah, but there's 20% that's left, that sounds horrible, but not really, because 80% is often good enough. 80%, is often good enough. And the other thing is, well, what can you use those extra hours for? So again, going back to the mathematics, let's say you took 5 hours and you produced, 100 points of value, right? But it took you 5 hours. But if I did, 1 hour, 20%, I'd produce 80 points of value. Then again, perfectionists might say, yeah, but that's 20 less. Yeah, but I have 4 extra hours now I can use. So if I 24 more projects, right? Total of 5 projects, 20% each, 80 points of value each, right? That's 400, if you're following me, of, points of, value there versus the 100. So, mathematically speaking, the 80-20 principle, over time allows you to produce far more. Now, the thing I'd like to add is there are some situations, though, when you can't 80-20 something, because up against the competition, say 80% won't be good enough. But what you can do is what I call the 96% solution, which is do a first pass at it, get it to 80%. What's the least amount of effort to get it to 80%? Then see if you can delegate that remaining 20% slice to someone else in your team, or if you have to come back and do it, that's fine too. But try to delegate it to someone else in your team. Ask them to 80-20 that 20% slice. So, what's the 80% result within that piece? Now, again, you do the mathematics, the 80% of that 20%, right? That's 16 plus the original 80. That's giving you 96% result, if you're following me. 96%, 2 rounds of 80-20 effectively. That's, nobody's going to notice the 4% that's missing. That's good enough.
That's good, because like what you mentioned on your videos, like asking other people for feedback. Because I remember when I was in college, I would literally spend like 15 hours writing a paper because I was so focused on getting 100. 15 hours. It was a lot of work to get those hundreds. But then I had a good buddy of mine in my class. I'm like, how much time did you spend writing this research paper? Oh, I spent like 2 hours. He was focused on, I only have to get to 90% because the 90% is an A. So like, for example, where he would spend 2 hours to get a 90 to get an A, I would spend 15 hours to get 100, but I was neglecting spending time with my wife or my youngest son at that time. And now thinking back, a 90 is still an A. You don't always have to get 100, but I just felt like I had to get that 100 because I needed to prove to myself that I was good enough to get 100. But at the same time, it's just ask people to support you. If you're doing some work, have them look at your work and get feedback. That way you don't have to spend all this time trying to get something perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can look for 80-20 opportunities throughout your day. You can be writing an email, and you can say to yourself, because I used to write really long, right, descriptive emails, right? It's like, man, this thing could have been submitted for a novel,
Yes.
And complete waste of time. And I forced myself to break that I went through a period of time where I forced myself to write emails without any capital letters or punctuation. And what's funny about that is that it's impossible to write a lengthy email when you can't use capital letters or punctuation, because after a certain length, it just looks like a complete mental brain dump of garbage. It doesn't even make sense. And so, it forced me to just write 1 or 2 lines, which again is good enough. It was like 20% of the effort for 80% of the result. And people spend so much time in their inbox, and then on a per email basis, they spend way too much time crafting their responses. And they could just be cranking, again, what's the 20% effort on this response that will get me 80% of the result that I need? And you can look at that on a micro basis through email. You can look at it, through things that you're working on during the course of the day. You can look at it at a more macro level with the goals that you set for the quarter. And you say, okay, well, what's the, again, 20% of effort that I can use to grow this particular number that will get me 80% of the result? and then let's move on to the next thing. And that breaks perfectionism because of the very fact that it's forcing you to get comfortable with 80% being good enough. Like that's the spirit of it, because a perfectionist wants 100%, but this model says, nope, you got to be happy with 80.
Yeah, that's good. And the truth is, no matter how hard you try to be perfect, we're not perfect, and that's okay. You don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
So, now, for entrepreneurs or for anyone who might be a CEO currently, you were named one of the top CEOs in the UK. What does it take for someone who's listening? What does it take to be a top CEO?
Great question. One is you have to have a great sense of your team and their development needs, and what it is that they need to succeed, and really be the force that helps them do that. As a CEO, you have to work successfully through others. You're not doing a lot of the work yourself, really, very little. You're orchestrating the team to produce at the highest level possible. You have to set a great vision for that team. They have to understand where they're going. You have to rally them to a better future, and they need to understand that in simple terms. You have to be a curator of that team. You're that team's coach, so you have to be looking for the absolute top talent out there, getting them on the team, taking the tough calls if necessary to call the bottom of the lineup if they're not able to kind of play their spot as well as they could, and coach those who are say average performers up to a higher level of performance. You need to be decisive, prioritizing speed over precision in your decision making, not sit on things. As a CEO, you're effectively a decision-making engine at times, helping nudging people to the right decisions, making decisions, questioning decisions. And I'd say, one of the most important things is that you just need to be incredibly reliable. When you say to people, yeah, I'll come back to you on that, there can't be an instance where you just don't follow up. That cannot happen. You have to follow up. You have to do the things that you say you're going to do. You have to follow up. You have to be consistent. People need to see you as a beacon of reliability, dependability, because whatever you aren't will then also manifest in others not being that as well. So if you're acting indecisively, it will breed indecisiveness. If you're acting unreliably, it will breed unreliability. Those are a few of the main things that I'd say. Really looking after the team, having a clear vision for that team, making sure you have the right players, being decisive, being reliable, and of course looking after the numbers as well, right? If the metrics, if the numbers aren't lining up, then there's nothing to shepherd, so to speak.
Is there certain types of people you like to surround yourself? Because I know one of the big mistakes a lot of people make is they tend to hire people who just like them. But I realize you need people who are completely different than you, because if you're an analyzer, you need somebody who's not going to be an analyzer, someone that's constantly going to be able to help you with your strengths and things that you're weak on. They're going to be really good at those things.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. It's like, when's the last time you saw an NFL team win the Super Bowl with the whole starting lineup being a collection of quarterbacks, right? I mean, it just doesn't happen, right? It's like you have every single position is accounted for, and there's a different player with a different skill set, make up everything, right, for each position. It's just exactly the same as a team. You have to have that complementary fit. It brings up another good point too, regarding teams and getting the right people and being a CEO or just being a leader. You don't have to be a CEO, but just leading a team. Make sure you're running a team actually, and not a family. And people often get a little bit too cuddly, I think, in business, and And it's so nice to describe it as a family, and you want to, because you want people to feel, super, looked after. But hey, the people on sports teams, they feel looked after too, but they're on a team, not a family. And there's a very, very important difference, because teams are optimized to win, right, at all times, whereas families strive to stick together no matter what. Can you see how that can hurt a company's performance?
Definitely.
Right? Think of your favorite coach, and everyone can see that whatever sport we're talking about, the point guard, the left fielder, whatever, the quarterback is not performing. And, post game, in the interviews, he's having it handed to him. What are you doing with this player? You got to trade him. This isn't working. He's been with us though for a long time, and I know his mom and his dad, and we're like a family here.
You're losing.
Yeah. People would be like, what is this guy smoking? Right? That would last one post-game interview. He'd get absolutely dragged over the coals in the media. And eventually, if he didn't shape it up, he'd lose his job because they'd keep losing their games. So yeah, you have to lead a team. Don't lead a family in the workplace.
That's good. Now, I wanted to ask you, what are about three of your biggest challenges you ever overcame in your entire life? And what are things that you learned through those experiences? Because I know a lot of times, we go through really hard times. Just like, for example, you're saying, your restaurant company, you had to file for bankruptcy. That's that's a hard thing to go through. Some people would just quit. But a lot of times through those really challenging experiences, we've learned so much about ourselves that we wouldn't be where we are today had we not gone through those experiences, those painful experiences.
Yeah, the restaurant chain's a great one. We had the irony of the whole bankruptcy thing is that we had just gone through a painful restructuring exercise as well. And just 3 months later, it was all for naught because it just gets wiped out by coronavirus. That taught me the importance of remembering that you are you. And what I mean by that is that I had identified so much of my self-worth, with the chain, that even though I wasn't actively, managing it or running it anymore, I just had a board position at that point. It just felt awful. I was in tears several times, really breaking down about it. Because your hands are just tied behind your back. There's nothing you can do. The government forced closure, all of that. You have no revenue. Landlords demanding their rent, and it forced me to. Be the phoenix, right? So reborn from the ashes, and it reminded me that we go through phases in life, and it's very rare that you'll find someone who does the same thing their whole life, these days anymore. I think it used to be a thing of past generations. That doesn't really happen anymore. And so don't be afraid if for example, if you're listening and you got a similar situation, especially with the current environment we're in, you may have to let something go. But remember, you're you, and whatever you're letting go isn't you, right? You're not letting go of yourself. You're letting go of something that wasn't you to begin with. That was a good lesson, going through that experience, a good lesson of loss. Another big learning experience for me was about 10 years ago. I was on a plane coming back to London. I've had high blood pressure before that point many times, and I'd been in and out of hospital, and then suddenly it all culminated on that journey. And as I sat on the plane, I got incredible chest cramps and pressure and pain down my left arm, and my whole left arm went completely ice cold. And a doctor rushed up from the back of the plane, checked my vital signs, and said, "We need to land the plane immediately. I think he's having a heart attack."
Oh my God.
And the plane emergency lands. I get taken off the plane by an emergency response team, whisked away in an ambulance. And I looked up into the eyes of the paramedics staring down at me. And I said, "Please don't let me die. I have a 5-year-old son who's 15 now." And he just, I don't remember exactly what he said. I think it was something along the lines of, we're going to look after you. So, just rest. I woke up the next day in the hospital realizing that, because I've been obsessed with peak performance my whole life, but I realized that up to that point, it was peak performance at the cost of my health and relationships. And, I hadn't really been spending enough time with my son specifically. And I wasn't looking after myself at all from a health point of view. But I had this indestructibility to me, right? It was like 35 at the time. I thought, well, what can happen to me? I'm 35, Grim Reaper knocks in the door, and it's a rude awakening, because you're like, okay, I don't want to do that again. What that sparked, the learning from there is what has become my business today, which it really sparked a quest to understand on a deeper basis. If our goal in life, if there's one thing that unites all of humanity, regardless of religion, race, geography, even time, there's one thing that unites all of humanity, and that we're all on a quest to become the very best version of ourselves, become the best that we're capable of being. And that's what I equate to peak performance, to perform at a peak level. And I realized following that plane incident that I had been sitting on a one-legged stool. I was missing 2 legs. I thought peak performance was all about work and achievement at work. And I was missing the health leg, and I was missing the family leg. And I didn't get it right immediately. And that would be my third learning, because you asked for 3. So a few years after the plane incident, I got my health together. Okay, work is going all right. And then my wife tells me she's leaving me. Because I wasn't being the husband and the father that I should have been. I was sleeping on the job still, essentially. And she needed me to be a lot more present, and available, right? I needed to be fully awake, right, in my role, and not just be around, but not, be tuned in. And I was, she had done so much, and still to this day does so much for me, that made me realize that, don't take, whatever you do, don't take those closest to you for granted. Because, again, when I was in that ambulance, and I said what I said to the paramedic, I didn't say, "Please don't let me die," because I haven't cleared out my inbox. I said, "Please don't let me die. I have a 5-year-old son." That's what matters most, right? That taught me to, really make sure that I was giving my best for her too. And all of this, so I lost a company, almost lost my marriage, almost lost my life. And those 3 things, that's your health, your wealth, and your relationships. And that's the 3-legged stool. And I'm at the end of this month, September 30th, on Amazon, my new book comes out of the same title, called The 3 Alarms, which is a system that kind of codifies everything that I've been talking about, into a system to help people transform, their health, wealth, and relationships, and become a peak performer in the areas of life, that matter most.
Wow. Yeah. You've been through a lot. Now, for a high performance person who's listening, because a lot of times what people do is they put everything into one thing. How can you be an extremely successful CEO or run a business? So you have your business, but then you have your family, and then you have your personal life and all that kind of stuff. How can you manage all that? How is it possible? Because a lot of times people will have a 10x your business. Dang, your business is great. But as you said, your marriage is not going well. Your kids can't stand you. How can you have it all?
Yeah. So what I did, and I'll go back to the book, again here, because what I did was I chose 3 best self identities. What I mean is in health, work or wealth, however you want to refer to it. Let's call it health, work, and relationships. I said, what does a champion version of me look like in each of those? And I gave it a name. So at health, I called myself world fitness champion. I'll never be a world fitness champion, but that's what I say. I have proved that with the basketball and baseball experiences. And then for work, I think of myself as the world's best coach. And then for home, I think of myself as world's best husband and father. And the 3 alarms, the simple tool or concept there is that I went into my phone and I actually set 3 alarms, and I gave the alarms those names and timed them to go off so that the most appropriate champion version of me was powering that segment of the day. So what I mean is that at 6:30 a.m. on my phone, every day it goes off as this world fitness champion to remind me that's the person, that's the version of me who's going to the gym. 9 a.m., world's best, coach pops up to remind me that's the version of me who's now starting the day. And at 6:30 p.m., world's best husband and father goes off to prompt the question, well, how would the world's best husband and father walk through that door right now? And by segmenting my day into those champion versions of me, giving them a name that means something to me and timing it for the appropriate part of the day, it brings a lot more intentionality so that I can manage that 3-legged stool of health, work, and relationships so that, God forbid, it's never imbalanced again.
I was going to ask you, how can people show up better using their phone alarms? And that's
yeah, there you go.
How can someone achieve high performance in their career and not sacrifice their health and relationships?
Well, it would very much, I think, go back to what we were just talking about, where by setting a priority that you're going to define what the best version of you looks like in each of those areas, and then be super conscious of when's the appropriate time of day to kind of cue in that version of you, almost like an actor or an actress stepping in. That's the fun way I like to approach it, on a daily basis like that, and just being hyper aware of what best looks like and when's the best time for that version of you to show up.
So I'm sure one thing that will help, for example, you do your job at a certain time from say maybe 6 o'clock to 3 o'clock or 5. But then when you get home, I'm only spending my time with my family. I might get a phone call about business or whatever it might be, but I'm sorry. Now my priority is just my family, spend time with my wife, spend time with my son, where some people, they're like, well, they come home, but then even though they could be spending time with their wife or their kids, they're focused on their business. And then, as you said, you're neglecting your family. Just set your priorities straight and stay committed to those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And have a genuine emergency is a genuine emergency. But when you take those calls in the evening, was the world about to implode because you didn't answer the phone? Was the sun going to explode into, a million pieces because you didn't take that call? Was it truly going to be Armageddon? Or are you just doing it out of habit?
Yeah.
And could it have waited till the morning? Probably, right?
Probably, yeah. That's good. Now, I wanted to ask you, so for the past 20 years, you've studied the world's most successful people. What did you discover about those people?
Gosh, so many things. They're very clear about, who they are, where they're going in life. That's the identity side of things. They're incredibly productive. They weren't born productive. They've just very consciously worked on their productivity to make themselves more and more productive, make themselves more and more conscious of how they use their time. And they're anti-fragile. So what I mean is, my favorite quote is Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And, most people, what Mike was referring to is that once I unleash my punch, it's game over for you, right? And then eventually, of course, he met people who could withstand the punch. And you want to be able to withstand those hits because they're coming left, right, and center on a daily basis. And you do that by reframing stress, reframing pressure. What I mean is our bodies get this intuitively. So our bodies are when I say anti-fragile, so it's a book by Nassim Taleb called Anti-Fragile. And it's basically, he asked, well, what's the opposite of fragile? Most people say robust or resilient, but he says, no, it's not robust or resilient, because that just means you're able to survive stress or shock and you stay the same. Anti-fragile is that, you become stronger as a result of the stress and the shock. You actually become better. And so and our bodies get this intuitively, right? Like it's part of our, we go to the gym, right? You stress a muscle, it causes it to grow. Expose the body to germs and bacteria, it develops the immune system. UV radiation in small doses actually repairs tissues, right? Generates vitamin D. So our bodies get this, and we just got to get what's going on naturally in our bodies up here in our head. And what I mean is we do that by you turn life into just one big mental gym. So every moment of adversity, thing that doesn't go your way, challenge, obstacle, that's just a repetition in the gym of life. And you step into it, complete the rep, like it's a bicep curl or whatever else. And by completing the rep and stepping into it, that's how you get stronger. You don't get to the gym, look at the rack of, weights, and then run away and expect to, get stronger. Right? You don't build your legs by going to the gym and then avoiding the leg press. So you don't become stronger in life by avoiding stress. You become stronger in life by reframing it, stepping into it, and completing the rep. And that's one of the other hallmarks, I think, of peak performers. So in summary, I refer to this as IPA, like the beer, but it's better for you. So identity, having a very clear sense of who you are, right, where you're going. You can use that 3 alarms technique to help. Productivity, making sure that, take that 80-20 rule. What's the 20% of effort for 80% of the result? And anti-fragility, right? How do I not stress myself out by trying to live a stress-free life and instead step into it and become stronger as a result of it?
That's good. Now, we're going to start to wind down now because I know you're a busy guy. Now, what are some 3 main points that you would really love for people to take away from this podcast, Eric?
Don't ever think it's too late to become extraordinary. It's never too late. Don't ever be afraid of having to reinvent yourself, because you always can. And I'd love to help you, in any way I can, whether that's through, helping you go deeper on the 3 alarms concept, or the IPA concept that I referred to. When is this going live? Or when is it?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday? Okay, great. So here, for the listeners then, up until October 21st, I'll extend this to the listeners here. So if you head over to my website at Eric with a C, Partaker.com. I'll give you the links for the show notes and everything as well. If people head over to the website, I'll give you access to a free digital copy of the new book. So you'll get the new book, and then there's a free training series in there as well. So some videos with some worksheets that will help you kind of embed the learnings. And so I would encourage people to head over there and try to make use of some of the things that you've heard today.
Okay, good. Now, one question I always like to ask people: you go back to, say, about 18 years old. Is there anything that you would have done different? Something that you would tell yourself, hey, Eric, this is what you should have done. For some people, they usually say, I wouldn't change something, but some people would.
Yeah, I would have, at that time, I was a horrible procrastinator, and I would get so overwhelmed with always thinking I had to finish things. And I would have whispered into my ear, hey, just choose to start, because finishing can take an indefinite amount of time, but starting takes just a second.
That's good. Very good. Now, Eric, for people who are interested in hiring you as a coach, how can they hire you as a coach? What can they experience? And then also, or I should say, what can they expect? And also, how can people find you online?
Yeah, so if anybody's interested in coaching, I'd be happy to have a chat. What I do is help people realize their full potential in both business and life. So it's a combination of business and life coaching together. So I don't want to just help you scale up your business, but also help you scale up yourself. What's the best version of you look like, and not just in the work front, but also in the health and the home fronts. And if you just head over to my website and ericpartaker.com, and you'll find all the social handles. There's a YouTube channel with tons of videos. I just started it a couple of months ago, but there's a good lot of videos on there already. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that jazz.
Yeah, videos are good.
Yeah, thank you. And then feel free to reach out, drop me a line, connect. I'm always happy to have a chat and talk.
All right, I absolutely love it. Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate your time. Thank you for being on the Power Your Voice podcast, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny.
You're welcome.
Johnny here. Thank you for listening to the Power Your Voice podcast. I would absolutely love to get your feedback on this episode and how it impacted you. Reach out to me on Instagram by sending a direct message to username Voice Podcast. If someone in your life could benefit from this episode, share it with them, and check out thepowerofyourvoice.com to read blogs on each podcast episode and learn more about what was discussed. And please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. This lets me know you find this show valuable, and thank you for listening.